Thank you, Pastor, for inviting me. This is a topic that is dear to me, dear to my heart, and it is dear to my heart because my own son has got special needs. So I'm not talking merely from a professional perspective, I'm also talking from a personal perspective. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So that's my son, Samuel. Samuel was born in '98 and not in the UK, in a different country. And happy child, we didn't have any problems. He was just developing as any child would. And around 10 months old, we started to notice some differences. We started noticing things that he wasn't doing, and we were a little concerned, as any parent would be. But we were trusting the Lord that things would change. And they weren't changing. And the very interesting thing that we experienced was that when you have a problem that people don't understand, people mystify what they don't understand. So that's what we do. Humans all over the world, we mystify things we don't understand. People blame. So parents of children with special needs are often blamed for what's happened to their child. And if it's in religious, cultural settings, they might say maybe it's a curse, or maybe it's a sin of the parents being visited upon the children. But if it's a non-religious sector, then it's something to do with your parenting, maybe. So we went through all of that as parents, which you would imagine would have been very challenging, because on one hand, we were desperate to see our son develop as usual, but on the other hand, we were having to deal with these challenges. But before I go on to tell you about what some of the stages we went through and the relevance to our setting today and to this talk, I just want to give you some good news. And can I have the next slide, please? So that's Samuel at work. He has signed his first job contract last year. He's working, he's earning a salary. And can I have the next slide, please? Samuel is practicing for grade 8, the piano. Which anybody who plays instruments knows that's the final grade. He's practicing for his exam. He's still got some challenges. He doesn't, his speech hasn't developed fully, but he can communicate, he can make himself understood, and he's quite independent. And it's a far cry from where things were at the beginning. So I wanted to share this with you just to let you know, if you have any children, with special needs, that there is hope, that these children can develop and they can have a good future, except that there is a journey involved. And that journey, that child cannot go by themselves. They need help. They need help not just from the parents, they need help from yourselves. Because being a parent of a child with special needs is a very isolating experience. Any parent will tell you that it is isolating. Why is it? Because people don't understand. And when they don't understand, they mystify. And when they mystify, they blame. And then they distance themselves because they're not quite sure what's going on, and they don't want that to affect their own children. Very natural, sort of reaction from people. So, a church like this is extremely important for people who parent with children with special needs, because sometimes it's the only place where they can find some understanding. It's the only place where they can find the support. So you and I, everybody in the church, has an important role to play in helping these children because they can develop. One of the things that really helped me on this journey was one day I was really praying hard for my son. I said, God, what does it take to heal him? You are God. You have the power. You can do anything. What's stopping you? Why are we still going through this? And I was expecting some very sort of big revelation or miraculous move of the Lord. The only thing I heard was, teach him. Teach him. And I thought, teach him what? Okay, knowing what, they're sort of taking it very literally. I was trying to teach him different subjects and to try to, but after a while, we discovered that was really not what it meant. Teach him really means tap into his strengths. Every child comes pre-wired with some strengths, and teach him means tap into those strengths. Find out what is this child gifted at. Stop worrying about what it's not gifted at. Teach him to develop what God gave him. And we discovered that he was very gifted. He was a gifted musician. You know, we got him a teacher to teach him how to play the piano. And the teacher said, I've never seen anybody like this before. I can just hum a tune and he'll sit down and play it without musical notes. It was just incredible. He has something called a perfect pitch. He's able to play the sounds that he hears perfectly. You know, so he might not be able to do certain things, which as a parent, you want them to do so that you can say, oh yes, my child compares well with other children. But actually, in some areas, he was far ahead of other children. And we needed to acknowledge what he was good at and help him develop. You see, and the good thing about it is that when you start to do that, you see the value of the child. You see the value of the person. Because one of the challenges that children with special needs, and indeed anybody who has any form of mental health or psychological issue faces, is stigma. So people don't understand, so they distance themselves. But when they start to see value, they change their perspective. So, you know, so Sam would sit in school and maybe there would be a performance and he would play a song at the age of 11 and sing whilst playing, and everybody's just shocked because he can't maybe string a few sentences together, but he can play songs that the adults can't play. You know, so by tapping into his strengths, we gave him a voice, a different kind of voice. And that's really what I want to encourage us to do. Our children come pre-wired with lots of strengths, and we can tap into those strengths and give them a sense of value, give them a sense that they are worth something, that there's a place in this world for them. You know, they don't have to live somewhere in a corner hidden. This is one of the challenges that parents of children with special needs face. Many of them can't go do the things that other people do. One mother said, I just dreamed one day I could just take my children to the cinema and watch a cartoon movie with them. She wasn't dreaming something big, something as basic as that. But it wasn't possible because the child will struggle in that environment. The noise, there will be too much noise. Some of the children really struggle with noises. Some of them is to do with the lights. You know, so there's all these sensory difficulties that the children experience. And unless we get to understand those difficulties and discover the best way to address them, the challenges remain a mystery, and we will continue to either, if they're our own children, we'll just struggle, but if it's someone else's children, we distance ourselves. Next slide, please. So there's this quote by Albert Einstein. It says, everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. And that is the reality of children with special needs. Comparing them with other children, you're always going to think they are falling behind, that there's something wrong with them. You know, that's why all my prayers were around heal him, heal him, heal him, because I just want him to be different. I want him to change and become like just every other child, like my daughter, for example. And the Lord said, teach him. Tap into his strengths. Bring out what I gave him. And now my prayer is, Lord, teach me to help him glorify your name. You know, because each one of us has been created to manifest the glory of God. That's really what we are here for. And we do it in different ways. And he has also been brought to glorify God's name. And so my job is to help him to do that to the best of his ability. Next slide, please. So this slide relates to a survey, research that the National Autistic Society did. So my son has autism, which we will talk about the nature of the diagnosis further down the line. But this survey focused on people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups. So it's very relevant to us. And the National Autistic Society wanted to understand the challenges that children with special needs in our communities actually face, and the parents as well, and some of the things we've already talked about. So there's, first of all, challenges in getting a diagnosis. Communicating with professionals is a problem. Awareness and understanding of the nature of autism, we discovered, was an area of challenge. There were barriers to accessing support and services, and then they said there was denial and isolation. And it's the last one I want to focus on. If you have a child with special needs, or you know someone with special needs, what do you think? Why would anybody why would anybody be in denial that there's a problem? What do you think? Let me get some responses from you. Your child has got special needs.
Stigma.
It's as simple as that. You want the problem to go away, and you want to bury your head in the sand. You want to act as if the problem doesn't exist, as if you hide, it will go away. And that only compounds your difficulties. For us, Samuel was born in a different country, so we were living in a different country. Then we came to the UK, a European country as well, but things were set up differently over there. And so things weren't picked up early. We had suspicions that we could never get a formal diagnosis. When we came to the UK, the first 6 months was good because we were in London, and obviously a very diverse place, so it wasn't a problem. The school accommodated his difficulties, and so that was very, very refreshing. But then we moved to Kent, and I have nothing against Kent, but but we didn't quite face the same experience. We didn't quite have the same experience in Kent. My son was, we checked my son into school, and then was it the same day or the next day we got a phone call. They were all in panic mode. We haven't seen anything like this before, basically, is what they were saying. And they just didn't know what to do. And this was a school. I went to see the special needs coordinator in the school, and even she didn't quite know what to do. Now, I thought they would be better placed to help than, and they would know more than we, the parents, because we were struggling with the situation. So that was quite challenging. But the good thing they did was they signposted us to services that could help. We got Samuel assessed, and he was statemented. Today there's something called EHC, Education and Healthcare Plan, that every child with special needs has if they go through an assessment. And that care plan is very good because it tells everybody what the child's needs are and then how best to address them. So if a child comes to your church and you discover that they've got special needs, you can ask the parents, is there an education and healthcare plan? That aspect of the plan that you can share with us. They might not want to share the whole plan with you because of confidentiality, but they might want to share some aspects with you that might help you as a church know how best to support the child. Because the plan is put together by different professionals, including educational psychologists. They do their best to really understand the child. So if, say, the child is easily triggered by noise, certain types of noise, or light, or even words. So in autism, you might say something and a child might just become agitated and you won't understand. Or you might say it in a certain tone of voice and the child might get agitated. When my child was young, when my son was younger, he couldn't tell us, but he would sometimes throw a tantrum and he wouldn't understand why he threw a tantrum. But once he got older, one day he said, "Daddy, your voice." And I thought, what's wrong with my voice? I wasn't upset, I wasn't angry, I was just talking to him. And that normal tone of voice, there was something about it that he found distressing. So I had to learn from him how to talk to him so that he doesn't find it distressing. So those are certain things that, if you're fortunate, you can find such information in that plan, that care plan, because there are yearly reviews and parents are invited to the reviews to contribute information that they know that can enrich the plan. So that it grows in size, gets bigger and bigger, and becomes more informative and more helpful. So that's something that can be very useful if you have access to. Next one, please. I think we've addressed this, so we can move on. Next. So a child has special education needs. The definition, the official definition is that a child has special education needs if they have a learning problem or disability that make it more difficult for them to learn than most children their age. So it's very sort of broad. Next. And special learning needs obviously sit within a wider issue of disability. So most societies, Western societies, have done a great job of addressing physical disability, and there's legislation that means that every employer, places of worship, etc., are obliged to make provision for people who have physical disability. So wheelchair access, etc., etc. But it's not like that with people with intellectual disabilities, the developmental disabilities such as ADHD and autism. Next. So when you're talking about children with special needs, most of the cases you're going to be seeing are autism, ADHD, global learning disability, but there are also people with specific problems such as dyspraxia. We won't have time to talk about everything in detail, but this is sort of to raise awareness, and if there's a need to talk about things in detail in the future, that can always be arranged. Next. So around 1 in 8 children and young people experience behavioral or emotional problems whilst growing up. 1 in 8. So if 1 in 10 is 10%, 1 in 8, we're talking about 12% of children. So it's a very common problem. It's not something isolated. Somebody you know has a child that has got these difficulties. But only 355,000 children currently have their education and healthcare plan. It depends on which part of the country you live in. So it's easier to get this care plan if you are it's easier to get a care plan in certain parts of the country. So when we were in Kent, it was very difficult, even though he was put on a waiting list. Eventually, he got one, as in the process was started. When we moved to Hampshire, we were surprised, and that's really what made a huge difference. Someone was allocated even before we arrived. Yes. So as soon as they heard that we were heading to Hampshire, someone was allocated. They gave us a link. They told us, yes, we are the person to contact anytime you have questions. This is what we're going to put in place. This is the school he's going to go to. We are going to put his name on the list. We're going to make sure he gets a place. Don't worry, everything will be fine. We couldn't believe it, that something like that was possible. But for parents, it makes a huge difference that someone else apart from yourself cares. And that's, you know, something to really bear in mind, because you could be that someone else for that parent. And it makes a huge difference. Otherwise, you feel like you're carrying that burden all by yourself. Next. So where do disabilities come from? You know, we said a little bit about this earlier. We can look at it from a spiritual, religious perspective. We can look at it from a medical perspective, from a psychological, a cultural perspective. But I discovered that the more we know about something from a scientific perspective, the less likely we are to attach spiritual explanations. That's just the reality. You might consider diabetes to be spiritual, for example, but nothing will stop you from going to the doctor, getting a diagnosis, if that is the case, and taking the medication, whilst praying to God to heal you. When it comes to psychological problems, somehow people think it would be an affront on God or something to seek medical treatment for it. People just want to go spiritual completely. Why do we do that? Why do we have a different approach for the rest of the body than we do for the head? Did the Lord not make them all? He made all the parts. And the different parts of the body, they have the same rights. Next slide, please. From a medical perspective, genetics plays a role. We don't know so much, it's still being developed, but we do know that autism, for example, runs in families, ADHD runs in families. Very often, going back to 20 years, it was a rare condition. Autism was a rare condition. That's what everybody thought. When it was understood, the diagnostic criteria were set out and assessment services were set up. Guess what? The floodgates opened. Suddenly, it turned out that there were lots of people who have the condition who didn't even know. They were always going through life as being awkward or weird or something else, until they discovered that actually they have a diagnosis, they have autism. So the environment plays a role, but it's not fully understood. Next. Now I put this slide in just to show you the different parts, the different organs in the body, the fact that each one of them has got some illnesses affecting it. Every organ. Okay. Next. And this is the brain. It is an organ just like any other. Next slide. And this slide shows you the different parts of the brain. There's a part in the front called the frontal lobe, and at the bottom here called the cerebellum. The cerebellum helps with balance. So if it's affected, a person may struggle to just stand like that. They may need to hold on to something, or they might fall. And there are conditions in which the cerebellum is affected, and people have these difficulties. What I'm trying to show you is that just as the liver, the pancreas, the stomach can have problems, these parts of the brain can also have problems. Okay? But the part that's often affected in conditions like ADHD and autism is the frontal part. Because this is the part that's to do with judgment, is the part that's to do with self-control, language, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So these are some of the functions. Planning, decision making, these things we take for granted. But the day your frontal lobe is gone, you'll discover making a decision is almost impossible. You can't get organized. Somebody puts 4 options in front of you and says, choose one. And it becomes a big problem. You don't know how to prioritize. You don't know which one is more important, which should come first. It becomes a challenge. So these things are real. There are parts of the brain which, if they are affected, these conditions can emerge. Attention. So in ADHD, that's what's affected. You've got a child that can't sit still and can't focus. You could be talking and going like this, yes, 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 and afterwards you say, what did I say? You don't remember anything. Because they weren't focused, they couldn't focus. Not because they were naughty. They couldn't focus. By the way, at first we used to think ADHD was just a childhood disorder. Today we know there are adults with ADHD. There are university students with ADHD. There are professors with ADHD. It was diagnosed, treated, they take their medication, and they get on with life. So these conditions, some of them are treatable, and the ones that aren't treatable can be helped, people can be helped to develop. Next slide, please. I don't know if you'll be able to see this very well, it's kind of small, but depending on which part of the brain is affected, I've listed things that people can't do. One of the challenges of children with autism is that they can't read facial expressions very well. So, your child might look at you and say, oh, I don't think mommy is very happy with what I did, or daddy is very happy. And they regulate their behavior based on what they can see. You don't even have to say anything. The child with autism, not necessarily. So, your face is just like a blank sheet as far as you're concerned. And it's not like it's completely, so it's not, that would be the extreme case. But most of them, they can tell if you're really angry. So extreme emotions, they can tell. If you're happy, they can tell. But the bits in between, might not be able to read. What that means is that they can't read danger. Because if somebody is about to hurt you, and you can't read their body language, you can't read their facial expressions, the danger might come in suddenly and you might not realize. So those are some of the things that we need to be aware of. Emotional regulation, the ability to control your emotions, to accept that, okay, I'm in this particular setting, everybody is quiet, so maybe I also need to be quiet and behave myself. And when we're all talking and we're all happy, I can be happy. That you all take that for granted. But for somebody with ADHD or somebody with autism, it's not that straightforward. They have to be taught. And it's not like you're going to teach them once and then work. Over and over and over again. So our sister was doing the Bible study earlier and teaching us about holiness, wasn't she? And what I like the fact that it was very practical. It's not some pie in the sky kind of holiness. No, real life holiness. If you have a child with special needs, you will learn holiness very quickly. You practice patience. You get to practice patience. Every day you feel like, oh God, I failed again. Every day you feel like, yeah, there we go again. But then you get to realize, wait a minute, not everybody has to face the challenges that I'm facing. So yes, I'm allowed to get it wrong sometimes. I'm learning. It's a process. Next, please. Next slide. So in autism, here are some of the difficulties, and it's good for everyone to be aware of them, because if you do notice some of these traits in a child, it's good to get support early, because the earlier you get support, the better the child will develop. The child will get a better chance of developing. So a child that doesn't give eye contact, a child that doesn't play with its peers, a child that doesn't notice when others are upset, which I mentioned earlier. Sometimes the children don't notice that other children want to play with them, so they ignore them. Next slide, please. Children that play with toys, the same toys each time in the same way. You just line them up and nothing else. It's a kind of play that other children can't really buy into because they want it to be more varied, but the child with autism is quite happy just lining the toys and looking at them. And they can get really upset if their routine is changed. Yes, without warning. We had so much difficulty with that until we finally cracked it. So we figured out that if we just count him down, it made such a difference. You know, he didn't have a sense of 5 minutes or 3 minutes. But if we say you got 10 minutes to go, and then we start counting from 10. And by the time he got to 3, he was happy and he would go. And that alone saved us a lot of hassle. You know? So there are little tips that you can get that can make such a difference. Children sometimes make unusual sounds, and also, as I said earlier, they struggle with sensory overload. A child with autism might find, you know, even a church service is very difficult, because they might find that it's too loud for them, for example. You know, so we had to buy, you know, ear defenders for our son and earplugs. And so if he's going out, he always makes sure he carries those things. Because when he was young, he used to do this. But he couldn't tell us what was going on. We just thought it was just a habit he had picked up. But there's something called hyperacusis, which simply means that a child is very sensitive to noise. And so we bought him those ear defenders, and it made a huge difference. Next slide, please. Okay. So I said they struggle with reading facial expressions, but also some of them lack fear. You know, they're not afraid of anything because they can't read the fear. They can't read danger. You know, your fear comes from the fact that you know what's dangerous. But they don't know what danger is, which means you as a parent have more work to do. Okay. If in a group setting, say in church, in children's church, you might be talking to the children. Children, we're going to be doing this, and then we're going to be doing that. And most of the children will get it. The child with special needs might not get it. And they don't know that a transition has come, that the time has come for you to move from one activity to the next. And then so for him, there's been a drastic change without warning. He throws a tantrum and you don't understand why he did it. But actually, when you go back and trace, it makes a lot of sense. A transition has happened. So there are visual aids that you can use. You know, you can have a visual timetable that the child knows we go from this to this to this to that. So when the time comes to change and you're telling the other children that we're about to do this, you show a picture for those children who can't tap into your words to know that time has come to transition. Next, please. I think I've mentioned most of what's here already. Next slide. So for parents, as I mentioned earlier, it can be a challenging journey. Parents struggle with feelings of guilt. Is it my fault? Is there something that I could have done better? And for some families, financial worries. You know, we got a teacher for my son for many years. That's a lot of money. We got speech therapists. That's money. You know, so there are financial challenges that come with that, which is why any support that families can get is always welcome. Next. So in a church setting, I think I've mentioned some of this already, but training staff to recognize these conditions and to know how best to support children will definitely be a way forward. And you know, Pastor and I have talked about it already, that this is something that would be useful for the church to have, especially the staff that deal with the children. But I wouldn't limit it to those. Anybody that's interested in learning more about these conditions, I think it would be useful to have such training. Next. So for ADHD, the difficulty is with sitting still. They are fidgety. They talk and act before they think. They have angry outbursts. They don't pay attention in class, in school. That's all that it's talked about. And then he has something to remember, he crossed the road without looking. He crossed the road, so that's dangerous. Next slide. Next. There are two ways of meeting difficulties. You alter the difficulties or you alter yourself to meet them. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. This is not something that we can change. With ADHD, there's actually treatment. People can take medication and get better. As I said, there are people who have gone all the way to university and graduated with ADHD. But with autism, it's more about training, it's more about awareness, more about understanding the condition. Next slide, please. So that journey of helping someone with autism, ADHD, any other special needs is recognize the signs and symptoms and accept that there is a problem. This is the difficult bit for parents, is accepting that there is a problem. Then try to understand it. Try not to bury your head in the sand. Try to know what's going on. The more you know, the better. Identify obstacles to accessing support. Stigma and culture are one of them. It's important that you look in yourself and say, in what way am I hiding from this problem? Because we are humans and sometimes we don't. And then finally, it's important to continue to learn and improve your understanding. We are constantly learning about some difficulties, but its strengths as well. Next slide. If you suspect a child might have special needs, and that might be because you work with the children in church, and maybe the parents aren't aware yet, but you are beginning to suspect, okay? I think the first step would be to try and have a conversation with the family to help them to understand. Now, many people would have suspicions already, but they're hoping it will go away. They're praying it will go away. So if you approach that conversation from the perspective that we're talking about, of understanding the challenge and to come alongside them, people are normally receptive and they are willing to accept help. If they know it's not coming from a preachy perspective where you're saying that there's something wrong with your child and there's something that's got to be fixed, but it's more a case of, is there a way we can be helpful because we think your child has got some difficulties? And if they do agree, then you can point them in the direction of the GP, being the first in your port of call. And it's good to go to that appointment with a list of signs and symptoms that you've noticed, because the appointment might just be 10 minutes or something. And so it's helpful if you go and say, I've noticed A, B, C, and D, and to really insist on this being taken further. The GP may then refer to CAMS, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, where they can do an assessment and start the whole process. And through that, they also get an educational healthcare plan. In terms of support for autism, there's National Autistic Society, there's Autism Hampshire, there's No Limits, and next slide, please. There's Moriah. I don't know if you've heard about Moriah before. So this is a family support group for parents who have children with special needs. And I know the person that runs this group, and it's this person from similar background. So it's a very good support group that you really want to link in with, and they'll be able to share the experience, the knowledge they have with you. So Moriah, and I think their email address is moriahforyou@gmail.com. Moriah Family Support Group. You can find them on Facebook as well. Next slide, please. I think we've talked about this. Next slide. Yeah, so these are some of their visual aids. Very simple pictures that can help a child know what's going on. If it's mealtime, you show them it's mealtime. Next. So it's good to have a structured environment, calm, In quiet environment, that can be difficult in the church sometimes. Consistent routine, that the child, so that it's predictable. The child knows what's happening, because a lot of the tantrums come from not knowing what's happening. Next. Next, please. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be having time to talk about this because we're going to be doing question and answers as well. Next. Yes, I think I'm going to bring it to a close here. So to summarize what I've been saying so far, children with special needs, it's a fairly common problem. 1 in 12, about 12%, 1 in 8 children have some form of difficulties. And therefore the problem is nearer to you than you think. The next point is you can be part of that support group for these parents. It's very isolating being a parent with a child with special needs. Thank you very much.
Situation, but the coordinator of special needs, they did study him for a bit, and then they decided to do some diagnosis. They actually did several experiments. They did several experiments on him to find out what his situation is. But up until now, they have no idea what the situation is. But what they did was to put him on the education healthcare plan. But it was almost as if it's nothing, because they don't actually know the real problem. So what they did was to put him on life independence education, which he stayed in for so long, and they had to actually graduate him because nothing was improving. There was no proper plan or structure for him to develop or learn. And so he's out now, but it's even difficult for him to even get a job. And I would say my dad is still actually in the blaming game, and it's making it more difficult because I have to take the responsibility of trying to help my brother, even as me growing up myself. I'm trying to find my feet and everything. So in this situation, how can I help my brother? What do I need to do? Because I actually don't know much about it as well, because I'm also trying to focus on myself and everything. But he's out of education now, and nothing has been done to help him really, so I don't know. I would really love to be helped so I can help him.
Thank you for your openness. Thank you for talking about it. I think it's helpful for people to know and what's going on. And it's something I really encourage everybody to do. If you have someone with special needs, then because what happens is that we accumulate all this information somewhere that it disappears. The day you meet a professional, your mind goes blank and you don't tell them anything, and if they don't hear anything, they can't diagnose anything. So we want to try and get a notebook, and that would apply to the church setting as well. To have a kind of a notebook for each child. Then you build upon all the knowledge that you accumulated over the years, how you come to understand the child, and how best to support the child. So you keep it. So if, let's say, you have new staff join the department, they just have to go through the book and they know, oh, okay, so this is Josh. This is how we approach Josh. Josh doesn't like you talking to them in this tone of voice, or they don't like noise, etc. So it's good, the more you know about your brother, and there's a lot that you already know. But I'm talking about that conscious knowledge, not something that you know it's hidden somewhere in the back of your mind, but it's there. And then sharing that knowledge. Because the people that have made headway the most in autism and similar conditions, they were not professionals. They were not professionals. One of the leading voices in autism right now in the States is a lady who's autistic herself. And she was a misfit constantly. And it's almost like she took the time to study herself, to understand herself. And now she's teaching people. She's teaching professionals. I have to learn from her. Okay. So you can start. It's a journey. He's there. He's with you. Professionals couldn't get anywhere. Fine. Gather that knowledge, but support groups I think are very important. So that's how. Yes, please.
Environment where, or where people value their privacy, they kind of guard their privacy. What advice would you give a parent with a child with special need to share the care plan, or to share, advice on how well to look after that child, knowing fully well, the background in which they come from, kind of want to guard the privacy too? What advice would you give a parent?
Okay. So I haven't shared my son's care plan with any friend or anybody as such, but with institutions. Okay, so institutions are governed by confidentiality, and and the church is an institution, and so it can be shared with the authorities, with the pastor and the leaders of the if needed, within a very sort of a structured framework where you are sharing aspects that you feel comfortable sharing with. You're not sharing the whole thing, but aspects that would help them understand the child. I think it's useful because the more people understand, the less of a mystery it is. But you don't necessarily want to print a document and just put it in front of them and say, just take whatever you want. You want to. So I think privacy is important. And not everybody wants to put their issues out there, and I think I understand that. But at the same time, there is a little bit of a trade-off here. You really want people to be supportive. They need to know a little bit about how best to support you. If you keep it all to yourself, they can't help. Now also, not everybody can stand in front of people and talk and tell you everything, but you can select somebody in the church that you feel comfortable talking to and share a little bit with them. Or better still, you've got a pastor, approach him. He has got a heart for it. That's why he invited me to come and talk. And he has a desire to see this issue really addressed comprehensively in the church. So I would encourage you to talk to him. Yes.
Sorry, just one more question. There might be need sometimes in kind of environments such as this that you want someone to help, probably dedicated to a child with special needs in the midst of other children, just to reduce kind of distraction or help maybe the coordinator, the teacher. Do you think it can be perceived wrongly by the parent, or do you think it's an accepting way of helping?
I think a lot depends on what level of transparency. You got to know my son well, so even if the rest of the teachers or the authorities just didn't know what to do with this person, knew how to handle him. So when you're dealing with children with special needs, it's not just about the different maybe pictorial or visual aids, but it's also about the person. Allocating one or two people and saying, look, if you are not in, then it will be this person. Just sit with the child, get to know the child. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yes, I think that's what
All right.
Sorry. Just a little bit to what you just said. You rightly put it that children with special needs, usually, depending on whichever category they are in, they would have one-to-one in school settings. So usually they are more focused, they are less distracted in schools. However, what I have realized is that in settings like this or in other settings, the resources are not there to support those children, so they become a bit distracted. Whilst maybe at home or in school settings, they have the resources there already, so they do not displace those characteristics. That's the only thing I'll add to that. And my question is in the area of how the relationship between siblings with special needs and how it actually impacts on them, and also in situations whereby the other sibling there might be one person or all the siblings really not coping with the situation. How do you actually deal with that?
Yeah. So that is a
Sorry, just also to add to that, as the child grows, you might need to be educating that child also. Letting them know that giving the other child more attention is not as a result of them not being loved, it's just because their brother or their sister needs more attention. Because as they grow and they learn that, they might also be helping you in supporting that child.
Yes, definitely. And I know of a lady who can be found on Facebook. Her channel is, her page is, I think it's called My Life with Autism.
Mine, it's a contribution to what Pastor had said. I want to speak to parents or siblings that have children with special needs as a family member. I want to say that it is also very important to know that it is just not one person's responsibility. If we approach it from that angle, we can always see ourselves as helpers, directly or indirectly. Just come with the mentality that it is just not one person's responsibility. That's my own contribution.